Right, I think we're going to get started. So, good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Student Bites, your weekly source of insight into being LGBT in the business sector and graduate recruitment. My name is George Wright. I'm the student engagement lead here at my GWork, responsible for our student outreach and graduate opportunities. If you've got a question, or if you want to just talk or find out more about what we do, please don't hesitate to drop me an email, or you can find me on LinkedIn or my GWork. This week, we're joined by Reed Smith, an international law firm engaging predominantly with corporate matters across Europe, America, Asia, and the Middle East. But before we get into our panel, let's take a look at this week's news. You may remember last week that Virgin Media and O2 were said to be in talks about a merger. This week, the news confirmed this, as the owners of both companies made clear the agreement to merge, which is expected to award £7.1 billion from the recapitalisation proceeds. The new aims of the merged organisation, aside from trying to tackle Sky and BT, is to invest in high-speed internet and 5G capabilities, which their 30% predicted market share is expected to enable them to do. At 30%, they would be the largest company in the market, but this remains to be approved by the Competition Authority as to whether or not this is seen as lessening competition within the market, which shall prove to be a hurdle both companies will have to scale. There has been no mention of ITV, however, of which Liberty Global, owners of Virgin Media, have a 10% stake in, and so it seems safe to assume that it won't be included in the merger. This is not yet, however, set in concrete, and we'll hopefully see more updates on this soon. Debenhams has declared intentions to shut 5 stores after failing to reach agreements with landlords. Last month, the high street retailer fell into administration to protect the business during the coronavirus lockdown, as many companies have begun to feel the significant pressure exerted by current market conditions. Debenhams agreed to a deal with landlords and was able to retain 120 of its stores to open after lockdown. For these 5 stores, however, Debenhams failed to reach a deal and will be forced to close permanently, seeing the loss of up to 1,000 jobs. The stores closing will be the centres at Reading, Croydon, Birmingham, Leicester, and Glasgow Silverburn. Another 17 stores remain in the balance as deals have yet to be reached. Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, has pledged to move the car maker's headquarters out of California in response to lockdown measures. The Alameda County Health Department blocked Tesla's plan to reopen its factory due to wider state lockdown measures enacted in response to the coronavirus, which forbid reopening of non-essential businesses. The factory is Tesla's only US plant and produces 415,000 cars annually. In a bizarre Twitter engagement, the type of which has come to typify Musk, he tweeted that Tesla will move its headquarters and operations to Texas or Nevada in response to the move. Any operations remaining in California would be contingent on how California treats the company going forward. Musk promised, amid further tweets encouraging legal action from his followers. Musk has also made it into the news in the last month, managing to wipe $14 billion off the value of Tesla after tweeting that its share price was too high, in direct contravention of a court order preventing him from tweeting without legal approval following a similar escapade last year, which saw him fined $20 million. He's been critical of the US government response to coronavirus lockdown measures, claiming the approach is fascist. Law firm Kennedy's this week announced a new graduate route to qualifying into the law firm, incorporating the new solicitors qualifying exams, the SQE. The plan is for a 30-month graduate solicitor apprenticeship, a GSA, which will enable graduates to start earning as soon as they begin the GSA without needing to complete the current legal practice course. Graduates will earn practical work experience before sitting the SQ1 and SQ2, in a move the company has hailed as enabling them to recruit from a wider range of backgrounds. The decision to enable graduates to earn as soon as they begin, rather than needing to take the LPC first, will enable many who had previously been unable to necessarily afford the studies to follow their career aspirations, without worrying about the possible consequences of financing. As many firms consider their graduate recruitment practices in the face of coming changes to the qualifying routes, we may expect to see many firms begin to offer similar schemes. And finally, following from last week's news that the airlines have been warned by the Competition and Markets Authority, the Civil Aviation Authority yesterday announced that airlines are legally required to issue refunds to customers who have had their flights cancelled by coronavirus within 7 days, with declarations that it may seek legal action against companies who won't comply. This comes amid news that the Colombian airline Avianca has filed for bankruptcy, and Virgin Atlantic is to lay off nearly 3,000 staff amid restructuring to survive the coronavirus. An estimated £7 billion worth of consumer money is said to be tied up in these required refunds, and at this time it is not quite clear how airlines will find all of that and manage to survive. Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary has expressed concerns, however, that it may take up to 6 months to refund all customers, and it is not yet sure how the CAA intends to go about timetabling the expectations for refunds to be achieved. For those uninitiated, Student Bites is a weekly webinar where we talk to different inclusive companies and their staff to learn about what it's like to be LGBT in the workplace and how you can get to where you want to be. This week's inclusive employer is Reed Smith, an international law firm that focuses on the law in energy, entertainment, finance, healthcare, life sciences, and transport. Although their headquarters are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA, the firm has 28 offices globally, advising many big players, including numerous world banks, oil companies, and is the third highest US firm by market capitalization in the UK. Joining us this week from Reed Smith are Oliver Rieche and Amber Davies. Oliver is a final seat trainee solicitor at the company's London office, currently advising on environmental, health, and safety matters. He also co-chairs the firm's UK branch of its LGBT network PRISM, Pride, Respect, Inclusion Really Matters. As such, he has been organising internal and external events on bi and trans inclusion at the workplace and the importance of allies in LGBT parenting. As a member of several youth leadership communities, including Sandbox, One Young World, and Global Changemakers, Oliver has a keen interest in civic society. Amber is currently working in the graduate recruitment team at Reed Smith before joining the firm as a trainee next year. Amber is now responsible for providing support to the graduate recruitment team in its marketing and attraction campaign, and its assessment, selection, and offer process for prospective trainee applicants. She also assists the graduate recruitment team in its commitment to ensuring that the firm is a visible champion for inclusion, diversity, and LGBT engagement with its trainee recruitment. So I would like to welcome Amber and Oliver. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you this week. I suppose we may as well start with the big questions. How did you get to Reed Smith, and what really sort of made you want to work there?
Well, is that directed to
either of you really? It's fascinating, to hear about sort of the different ways by which you've come to. Do you want to start with Amber, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So I had a bit of a kind of unusual route into law and kind of being a future trainee. So I was actually working at Reed Smith prior to gaining my training contract with them. So if I just go back, so I studied politics and international relations at the University of Bath, during which in my third year I worked in the graduate recruitment team at another international firm in London. So I had graduate recruitment experience, and then following my undergraduate degree, I went straight into the GDL and had a couple of back schemes lined up for the summer once I completed it. But I'm not sure if the attendees are aware, but training law firms usually recruit 2 years in advance, so I knew there was always going to be a year between my GDL and my LPC. So I saw the graduate recruitment assistant opportunity come up at Reed Smith, and I'd heard about Reed Smith just from my research of law firms in general, and had heard about the culture of the firm and that it was given that it's an American firm, had a very kind of relaxed, friendly, open and inclusive culture. So yeah, I interviewed there and I really liked the people that I met at the interviews and kind of the feel of the firm. So then I joined following the back schemes that I completed that summer in the graduate recruitment team, and then had the opportunity to apply for their training contract, which I'm very excited to start. I think, having already worked at the firm and been part of the firm, I've seen like firsthand what the culture's like, and the level of training that trainees get, and that it's very, it's not very hierarchical and very open and inclusive. So yeah, that was my route. So I'll be starting the LPC with the firm in September and then joining as a trainee next year.
Fantastic. And Oliver, if you just want to tell us a bit sort of about how you've come to the firm.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was a direct route, but also it wasn't really. I suppose I studied law with politics at Manchester. I initially wanted to become a diplomat. For various reasons, I decided against that, having done an internship at an embassy abroad. And then I did a master's at Cambridge in public international law. I ended up working for one of the European institutions in Brussels for some time, working on European integration matters. But I started to really miss making use of my legal skills. So I moved to London a couple of years ago. I wasn't quite sure whether to become a solicitor or a barrister. And the reason that was the reason I decided to join a boutique law firm and their commercial litigation department, as well as a barrister's chambers afterwards, like a year later. And then I weighed my options and decided to apply for a training contract eventually. And very similar to Amber, actually, I chose Rieche both because it was recommended by a friend of mine who's now an associate there, as well as other people generally who kept commenting on the culture. And for me, that's really important. And yeah, as Amber also quite rightly highlighted, whilst it is an American law firm, and I know that American law firms tend to have that kind of cutthroat reputation, I really skipped all of those firms where I thought that was the case, and Rieche luckily really doesn't fall into that category. And yeah, now I'm a fourth seat trainee about to qualify. Not the best time to do so, but here we are. I'm currently in the environmental health and safety department, and I've done seats in shipping litigation with a secondment to the Frankfurt office on asset finance. I did secondments to Liberty and Reprieve, but that was a pro bono secondment. And I did a seat in global commercial disputes. That's kind of a quick summary.
Fantastic. I think you've touched upon it slightly there, but could we just maybe explore a little bit about what your sort of office life is like? Well, maybe not at the moment, but what your sort of day-to-day would have been like, say, Oliver, if we start with you, and then what day
day-to-day office, it really varies. So the great thing about being a trainee, no day really looks the same, I would say. Also because and actually that applies now during coronavirus as well. Every day I wake up to different emails from clients or the supervising partner who needs advice or help on a matter, and it's really quite varied, which is exciting. So it pretty much never gets boring. That's one thing. The other thing I would like to emphasize is the fact that there are so many ways to get involved in the firm beyond just the legal work, which to me again is very important. I'm not somebody who just likes to get stuck in and do nothing else. I also like to get involved as much as possible, and by that I mean pro bono is pretty much second to none at the firm. We've got a pro bono team of lawyers who specifically work on purely pro bono matters, and they always need help. So you can get involved from, domestic violence issues to helping Lawyers Without Borders, to drafting EU legal advice. So I heavily got involved in that, as well as various sports societies, actually. And you can really take your own initiative. So I actually founded Rackets and Sports Society because I realized there was there was a tennis society missing, and I applied for a grant and I got it. And so now I'm running that together with another trainee. So there's lots and lots of ways to get involved. So yeah, to summarize, no day really looks the same.
Fantastic. I think you touched quite nicely on the idea, that law firms aren't, as much as the name says, it's not always necessarily, the lawyers. It's, it is still a business. And so, when, Amber, if you could just sort of talk to perhaps more like the graduate recruitment side, like the non sort of necessarily like heavily legal side of it.
Yeah, so if I just talk you through kind of the how the graduate recruitment process works. So it's kind of similar to what Ali said. It's my days aren't really the same. It kind of depends on the time of year and what the graduate recruitment team's looking to achieve. So, for example, in the autumn time, applications open, so we'd be going to law fairs and running events, encouraging as many people to apply to the firm and trying to just raise the brand awareness. So during that time, myself and my manager, along with trainees, will go to all of these events and just speak to students and encourage them to apply if they are interested. Then we kind of move on to the interview stage. So days are kind of taken up with running interviews. So recently we were interviewing, well, not recently, just before Christmas, we were interviewing for our winter vacation scheme, which took place in February. So we kind of had 60 odd students come to the firm to do a case study and a strengths-based interview, which I can talk about in more detail later if that would help. And then after that, we actually run the vacation schemes, which are either 1 week or 2 weeks, where we bring the successful candidates into the firm. They get to sit in departments where they'll have a supervisor, so an associate or a partner, and they'll have a trainee buddy, and they'll get actual real life work to do. Obviously, it would all be supervised. But they'll spend a week or two doing that, along with getting involved in social aspects, getting to go to meetings, getting to be involved in the networks, and meeting trainees and just loads of different people from the firm. And then during that scheme, they'll be assessed for a training contract, and successful candidates will then come back and join the firm as a trainee. So that's kind of the aim of the graduate recruitment team, to get as many people from different universities, different backgrounds, different places applying to the firm and attending our vacation schemes.
Excellent. I'm going to push ahead then. So how do you think LGBT staff are supported at Reed Smith? Oliver, you might probably be best placed on this because of your involvement with PRISM, but I'm just interested to hear from you both, sort of what is it like being LGBT staff at the firm, and sort of what kind of support is there?
Great question, George. Yes, there's fantastic support. I say this as the co-chair of PRISM, which is our LGBT committee. So hopefully the fee earners and non-fee earners agree with that. Apologies if they don't. Yeah, basically, I mean, I guess it makes sense if I talk about my journey into PRISM, because when I started, which was only a year and a half ago, I immediately signed up with PRISM, and I was so keen. I remember messaging the current co-chairs, and I was like, I don't want to be a passive member. I want to be active and want to be involved. And when I joined the first meeting, they actually ended up stepping down, which shocked me a bit. And they said, oh, but do you youngsters even need LGBT plus representation? Everybody's out and proud, and which is amazing. And I remember my hand shooting up immediately, saying like, absolutely, we're not there yet. It may be more equal, but we're not equal yet. And he was like, well, fair enough. If you want to get involved, let me know. And I basically then signed up, and I said I would love to get involved. I ended up becoming the co-chair with another newly qualified associate, and we've been running it for the last year and a half. The great thing is that I can genuinely say my biggest fear did not materialize, that being that there would be a lot of doors that would be shut and slammed into our faces, so to speak, as in that we would have to make a name for ourselves first because we're so young and not established in the firm, that people wouldn't take us seriously, that we wouldn't get any budget. And none of that has been true. We've received enormous support from the most senior people in the firm. We regularly have the office managing partners speak at our events to attract allies, which we think is really, really important in order to normalize the whole process and in order to ensure that the LGBT society isn't just seen as an LGBT community, but it's seen as really part of the DNA of the firm. And that's something that I very strongly believe in, because I don't think having an LGBT society just always is seen as something other for other people that identify, that will never really achieve what we're trying to aim for, i.e. like complete and utter equality, both at work and outside work. So far it's been a great journey. Obviously now during Corona, it's really tricky because we planned some great events. You've touched upon the fact that we focused on bi and trans inclusion last year, which we would like to continue doing, but also focus on other topics such as HIV awareness or intersectionality or LGBT plus and religion. But we probably will be waiting with that just because it's a little bit tricky to organize those events. But just an overview. There is a lot of support, and we're trying to push boundaries as much as possible.
Excellent. I don't know, Amber, if you had anything you just wanted to add to that at all? Or?
Well, yeah, I think it's what's really important to mention is that allies are really encouraged at the firm as well to get involved with all of the PRISM events and the PRISM network. And so, for example, like myself, as an ally, will try really hard to organise LGBT events with Oliver and Jess, who co-chair, as well as external events with networks such as Aspiring Solicitors. We worked as well with other law firms. I think 18 major law firms in London got together recently to run an annual diversity event in London, which was great. And we also have meetings with those firms kind of outside of the major event to see what they're doing internally, that we can speak and discuss with them and kind of compare ideas on how to make the workplace much more inclusive.
Fantastic. And to that end, do you think there is much more that needs to be done, either of you? Do you think there are still sort of these barriers to being out in the workplace, and how do you think they'd probably best be overcome? I don't know if Amber, if you would start, we'll start with Amber. Go.
I think it's maybe trickier for me to answer that in terms of the barrier aspect, given that it isn't kind of me that's experiencing it. I think though, however, from speaking to candidates, I think there is always going to, well, hopefully not, but at the moment there are still barriers, whether that's kind of personal perceptions of what it's like to be out in a law firm, for example. The candidates may have never, they may be at university and they may never have been in a professional environment before, and they might not realise, for example, at Reed Smith that we actively encourage everyone to bring their whole self to work. So that might be a sort of a kind of personal barriers. But I think Oliver might be better placed to answer that.
Yeah, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that there were no barriers anymore. I think, Amber, you're quite right in saying that there still remains some. I guess I would have to qualify it and say it depends on the person, but overall, yes. But for example, if I look at my own journey at Reed Smith, I haven't been affected by this negatively whatsoever. In fact, I would say it's actually been a bonus. Even during my training contract assessment, I know now the assessment centers are slightly different to 3 years ago. But when I went through it and I cited some things that I did with the LGBT community, and that was really positively received. And I didn't feel at all that I had to hold back whatsoever. And in fact, I made it a point, to emphasize that. But I do know that some people, and that might just be a personal decision, they still think it might have negative impacts on their careers. And there's a direct correlation between that thinking and age as well. So there's a real gap, a generational gap between LGBT plus open LGBT plus representation in the office, between younger and older staff members, and including those who show up to our events. And that's something that we definitely need to tackle, because we've spoken to some senior members at the firm, and they know that there are quite a lot of people who are still not feeling comfortable, and that's something that we would really, really like to tackle. And we're hoping that the more engaged we are, and the more we engage everybody at the firm, just as Amber quite rightly says, the more we include our allies, the more or the less fearful those people become. But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, so it sort of differs, I suppose, greatly between the different sort of identities and journeys that people have sort of come on, I guess, in their journeys to these firms. I said you've both had different paths through, and so I can imagine that sort of, the differing in backgrounds perhaps may have impacts on that. I think with Amber, you picked up quite well on the idea of the personal perception as well, and I think that's a barrier certainly that we'll have to come on to. I think you picked up quite nicely in that, this idea that we've got to work to be inclusive, and educate both within and beyond our communities, to really make sure that that's where we're headed sort of going forward. To that end, though, I just wondered if either of you had any tips for our graduates on how they can find out about whether or not an employer is inclusive, and sort of how they would look out for that. Amber, if you had anything.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is just to do your research, like really have a look online, attend events like this, try and meet people and speak to people from the firm and just ask them what they do in terms of diversity and inclusion. I think from doing your research, you can kind of differentiate between the firms that are doing maybe more of a ticking the box kind of exercise, as opposed to it actually being a key, motivation behind how the business is run, which is what it's like at Reed Smith. So I would say, just doing your research and maybe coming up with a list of things that are like your list of priorities of what you're looking for in a firm, and trying to kind of order them. And obviously you would want to find a firm that kind of ticks all of your boxes, but if diversity and inclusion is really high up on your list of priorities, then your research can be tailored that way, if that makes sense. So I think research is the most important, and just trying to speak to as many people from the firm as possible.
Excellent. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, Oliver, on sort of looking for inclusive employers.
Yeah, not much. I think that was that hit the nail on the head, so to speak. I would emphasize, whilst I think research is important, there's a trap that I've seen that some companies generally are very good at marketing, and they're very good at marketing themselves as incredibly inclusive and diverse employers. And whilst hopefully that is the case, I have heard of stories where, because they know that these days it's not very cool not to be diverse and inclusive, they are boasting a little bit too much, i.e. it's not realistic, or it just doesn't translate into actual action. And for me, that's really important. Do they have, and I think students need to, what Amber said, speak to people, because that's really the differentiator. Do they have an LGBT committee? Most likely. Almost all firms nowadays have one. But then they need to drill down. What activities have they done? How is it anchored in the DNA of the firm? Do they receive help from senior management? Do they receive help from graduate recruitment? Or are they basically left to their own devices? How active have they been? How many events have they thrown? How many people have they reached out to, including inside and outside the firm? These are the kinds of differentiators I would use, which I understand isn't always possible to find out, but it's something to be mindful of. And those are some of the questions that I suppose could be raised during an interview, and that really shows how that you're really keen on that.
I suppose it comes out to that main thing, doing your homework, getting in touch. We have webinars like this for graduates to reach out and ask these sort of questions, as I think you're not really going to end up knowing until you really sort of immerse yourself in it, being that finding them on LinkedIn or, MyGWork, or, following them on Twitter, Instagram, etc., and even just talking sort of to employees. So to that end, we're very grateful for you coming along to help us with that. But I think I'm now going to look a little bit closer at your graduate recruitment, if that's all right. And I just wondered, and Amber, you're probably best placed to help us with this. So if you could just run us through, how graduates can come to work at the firm, and sort of what that process looks like, just for our attendees. Thank you.
Yeah. So our graduate recruitment process has changed this year. So I'll talk you through the new one. So basically our applications will open in October for our 2 different schemes. So we run a winter vacation scheme which takes place in February, which is 1 week long, and then we run 2 summer schemes in the summer, one in June, one in July, which are 2 weeks long each. So they're the way. So you have to attend a vacation scheme in order to be assessed for a training contract, and that's something that we changed this year. We used to accept direct training contract applications. However, it seems to be a trend among most firms to try and recruit through your vacation schemes now. However, saying that, we do acknowledge that some people would not be able to attend a vacation scheme, whether that's due to childcare or, work commitments. So we can take them on a case-by-case basis, but the general route through to a vacation scheme is through the vacation schemes. The application process for the vacation schemes, the first stage is an online application form and a situational judgment test. So the online application form is fairly quick and simple. It's just, you've got to complete your educational background and your grades and some work experience. But saying that, we don't kind of look at that in too much detail. It's just because we need that kind of background information. We're basically looking to see whether the candidates have got a 2-1 at university, or if they haven't, if there's mitigating circumstances, and then just the work experience for some background information on them. Alongside that form, like I mentioned, was the test, and the test is basically it's online and it's not timed, so you can take as long as you like, but it basically generates some scenarios along with some different responses, and you rank the responses in order of how you would approach it in the workplace. So it could be something along the lines of you have lots of work, you've got lots of deadlines coming up, a partner knocks on your office door and asks you for help with something urgently. How do you respond? Then you rank the responses. So that's the first stage. If you kind of meet the benchmark for the test, then you are then sent some further questions to answer. We send 3 questions, and they're kind of research questions. So they'll be asking, why you're interested in the firm, something about a commercial topic, and motivations for a career in law, let's say. And then they're reviewed, and then if you pass the research questions, then you're invited to the firm for a face-to-face interview. The first part of the interview will be the case study, which I think is probably the most important element of the process. That used to take place actually at the end of the vacation scheme, and that would be what we would assess the attendees for the training contract, but we've decided to front load that and do it before the vacation scheme. So that will be basically, the candidates are given an hour to read through a pack of documents, making notes and highlighting however they want to. Then they go into the interview with their notes and the document, and they're asked a series of questions by partners and associates, usually two partners or associates, on the document, and they're allowed to, they're not expected to remember everything they've read in the space of an hour, but they're expected to go through the document and reach conclusions on the questions that they've been asked. That usually takes about an hour, and then following that interview they go straight into what's called a strengths-based interview, and it's fairly similar to the test that I mentioned before. The interviewers will give them a range of scenarios and ask how they would act in that situation. That's different to the type of interviews that most people are used to, which are competency interviews, where you kind of memorize before the interview, different, when you've worked well in a team and you have examples for it. This is slightly different because you don't know what the scenario is going to be, and you don't know what skill they're assessing. But so it's a little bit more difficult to prepare for, but we do it that way because we want to see people's natural strengths without all the rehearsed answers, so we can see people who are genuinely suited to the firm, and it works well for students as well, because you don't want to prepare really well for an interview and pass it because you tick all the boxes, but actually you're not suited to working at that firm. So that's kind of why we do it. But that's the process. And then on the vacation scheme itself, you are largely assessed on the work that you do for your supervisor, which the graduate recruitment team will get feedback on. There are a few other exercises during the week, such as a pro bono exercise and a negotiation exercise and a presentation, which will also form kind of the overall feedback for the training contract offer.
Excellent. Can I just clarify for our attendees? So a lot of firms have their vacation schemes open to penultimate year law students. Is that the same at Reed Smith, or what with the majority of training contracts being recruited through vacation schemes? Is it more open in who can apply for that?
So it's second years and above who can apply for vacation schemes.
Second years and above. Excellent. Thank you very much. That much appreciated. And sort of going on further, and I said I really invite answers from both of you. But what do you really think that Reed Smith is looking for in the ideal candidate? That's applying for these vacation schemes, and then further down the line the training contract.
I think it sounds cliche, but because we put such an emphasis on the culture of the firm, I would say that there's not really two trainees that are, exactly the same. It's very diverse intakes and everything. So in interviews, it's difficult to say, but I think saying that there are key skills, and this will apply to different firms as well, that are necessary to being a good trainee and to showing the interviewers that you are trainable. So they're not expecting you to go into that case study interview and get everything correct. Because it's an actual legal document, but they are expecting you to get the gist of things and be able to communicate and show that if you were a trainee at the firm at the end of that training contract, you'd be a good lawyer. Is what they're looking for. I think there are key skills within that. So for me, the skills would be showing that you're organized, showing that you can prioritize, showing that you can read large bodies of information and relay it in a concise way, showing that you're confident but also self-aware, which is quite a tricky balance to strike, but they're the types of things that they're looking for. And they'd probably be more assessed in the strengths-based part of the interview, with examples that you give when you're answering the scenarios, as opposed to in the case study where that is testing your technical ability in regards to understanding the information and relaying it. I think those skills kind of apply to most firms because they're the necessary skills to being a good trainee and working in a professional environment. However, I think different firms will place different emphasis on which of those skills are the most important. But yeah, I don't know if Oliver has anything.
Yeah, Oliver, if there's anything if you wanted to add to that at all.
No, I think that was a really comprehensive answer, but not anything else. I mean, it has changed quite a lot, I have to say as well. When I did it 3 years ago, it was quite different. So I'm a bit careful to add my own thoughts in that regard in particular, because it might not be quite accurate any longer.
With that in mind, though, as you're both quite, familiar with at least the process at large, even though, if it has changed, were there any particular tips or advice that you found that you think would be useful to people who are sort of applying now?
I think it's such an annoying thing to say because I've been told that many times before and I hated hearing it, but now I catch myself, saying it myself, and it's the same old saying, just always be authentic or be yourself, or however you want to phrase it. And I didn't really understand what that meant when I was given that advice a couple of years ago, because I always thought that law firms, whilst they always say that, they really just mean, okay, but really try and tell us the answers that you think we want to hear. I think I'd like to think that I stuck to that advice and I was really myself during the interview. And I'm sure that hasn't changed because I remember during the interview speaking to the partner about my private life in the sense of, applying some of the scenarios that I was asked and giving examples in terms of the kind of hobbies that I was carrying out and really showing them what I was passionate about, what I liked doing, and they were not necessarily always legal examples. And I think that's something that we should all bear in mind, that nobody, including Reed Smith, expects you to rock up at an assessment center or the vacation scheme and know all the answers. As Amber has said, it's more about, the examples that you bring and what you've done in the past and the way you present yourself. And at the end of the day, they really, besides your great academics, they want to hire people. They want to see whether they want to share an office with you. They want to see whether they can trust you to run a case in a couple of years' time. And the only way to do that is to see whether you are a people's person. And I think that's really key. That's the reason why people keep saying be authentic, because they actually want to see what you're like as a person, as opposed to just, being this brilliant legal machine. So the more relaxed you can be and the more you can show them who you are, what you're passionate about, what you like doing, I think the better it comes across, because you will automatically come across as more natural, because it'll feel also more natural to you talking about those things, which in the end is just going to be a win-win scenario. So that's, I think, my biggest tip. Mm-hmm. I know it's hard to take on board, but it's something to think about.
And just adding to that, I think in general, kind of tips for when you're preparing for interviews is the firm or company, they will explain what type of interview you're going to have usually. So for example, when we invite people to interview, we'll explain that they'll be doing a case study followed by a strengths-based interview. Other firms will email you and say you're doing a competency-based interview and a written case study. So just make sure that you prepare for what it is that you're actually doing, because the way that you prepare will be different. So whilst for both of those interviews you do the usual research surrounding the firm and why you want to work there and their initiatives and their networks, and showing that you know a lot about the firm, the way that you would prepare for a strengths interview would be different to a competency interview, for example. So just make sure that you research what those types of interviews entail, so that you're not kind of thrown off when the answers are asked in a different way to the way you were expecting. It's just a general tip. But yeah, I think everything Oliver said about being authentic and bringing your not trying to pretend to be someone that you're not for the sake of an interview is really key. And like I said earlier, it's also beneficial for the candidate themselves, because so for example, in our interviews, when they give you a scenario, if you overthink it and think, what are they wanting me to say? And you actually answer it in a completely different way to how you would act in that situation. But then, it ticks the boxes and you get the training contract. You might not necessarily be comfortable in that workplace, because they might then expect you to always, liaise with your colleagues when you come up, when there's something you don't understand. But if your personal preference is to actually just work through it on your own, then you won't have that much of an enjoyable kind of office experience if you're having to act in a way that you wouldn't necessarily want to. So it's important. You might not get the training contract, but that's not to say that if you answered the question in the exact same way for a different firm, that you wouldn't get it for them. They might just have different ways of working. I think that's quite important.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to move over to our last question now before we move over to our attendees' questions. So if you're listening along at the moment, please feel free to start getting some questions together and leave them either in the Q&A or the chat, or come to them afterwards. But while you're doing that, I just wondered, Amber, Oliver, if you had any idea or any advice on what graduates can be doing at the moment during lockdown, to best use their time so that they're come out as prepared as possible, sort of to come to firms like Reed Smith.
So they could, like it's been mentioned quite a lot, but doing your research during this time would be really important. Make your list of priorities that you're looking for in firms, and then really take the time to go through their website, through their graduate recruitment brochures, and make sure that they on the face of it tick those boxes. You can also start like attending webinars like this, but there's lots of other webinars and things online that have been going around at the moment from different firms on how to prepare for interviews, and just tips and tricks regarding that. I think also what's really important is to you might have done this already, or already be aware, but making sure that you know kind of what your skills are and where you need to improve, and kind of getting those into thinking of ways that you can discuss that quite easily with interviewers and things. Because I think questions such as, what's your biggest weakness can often throw people. So maybe make a list of, tricky interview questions and start coming up with ways that you can answer them. But yeah, I think they're kind of the main things in terms of applying. When you're looking to apply for places, you can use this kind of downtime to do your research and make sure you're as prepared as you can be for interviews.
Excellent. And Oliver, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not really. I think, again, that was pretty good. I guess it's just a matter of being visible, reaching out to people, even if it's sometimes a LinkedIn message, to people that you've met before and you feel like, it might be nice to check in again, especially like these kind of reminders, these visual reminders are so important now that we can't see each other face to face.
Excellent. I'm now going to take us over to our questions from the floor. And I start with our first one. It's just us, sort of LGBT and much wider. How has being yourself really sort of impacted your career? I suppose we'll start with Oliver and then come to you, Amber, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think I'm quite an outspoken person. So I didn't really hide in the workplace and then decide to have some sort of grand coming out. That's really not needed anyway. But, as I mentioned before, during my training contract assessment center, I already spoke about some LGBT initiatives I got involved in and what I learned, et cetera, and they were really impressed. So impressed, actually, that I remember the graduate recruitment advisor at the time highlighted that when I sat on a different panel a couple of years ago when I was already awarded the training contract. And she said, this really stood out because, it made you come across as incredibly personable. So I would say it's only impacted me positively. Also, the fact that I'm now leading PRISM together with another associate is just an unbelievable privilege and such a great opportunity to showcase my leadership, to really do something outside, as part of my work that's outside my legal work, that's really, really close to my heart. And, being able to receive so much support is incredible. And at the same time, reminding yourself that you're just at the start of your legal career and you're already being given a huge budget, for example, to administer. These are all skills that are going to come in handy later down the line. Speaking to various people. Last year, I gave a speech in front of 150 key clients at our Pride Summer reception together with the associate, who's the other chair. So there have just been so many good things coming off it, and being completely open and honest about it, as well as now. I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a gamble to say this now that we're coming towards qualification. It's definitely seen as a benefit if you can say that you got involved in the firm, and that doesn't just go for LGBT inclusion, that goes for any kind of initiative that you'd like to run. At least I can only talk about Reed Smith, but at Reed Smith, people value your contributions outside your daily work. And so just to sum up, it's just been a very positive experience to be completely out and getting involved.
Excellent. I don't know, Amber, if you had anything you quickly wanted to add to that.
Not really. I think, I've been lucky and always worked in places where you're allowed to, where you feel comfortable enough, even as being quite young and maybe have just started, to always, ask for help if you need it, or, speak to, partners, for example, at Reed Smith and ask for their opinions on things or feedback on work that I've done. And also, especially at Reed Smith, actually, they really encourage you to give your own ideas, and that they will be taken seriously. They won't kind of just be dismissed. So yeah, I think Oliver said, I'm quite an outspoken person as well, and quite confident. And I think it's quite nice working in workplaces that don't try and suppress that if you're only a trainee, for example. But yeah, mine's only been positive at Rieche.
Fantastic. I'm going to compound some of these questions together as they sort of come together on very similar things. So I'm going to start with some graduate recruitment ones. I've got one saying, I'm coming up to my final year's exams, and as such, when I apply for vacation schemes or training contracts, I will be a graduate. Will this be looked upon negatively, or do people of various ages apply?
Yeah, that's not looked on negatively at all. We've recently just given a training contract to somebody in their 40s, I believe. We also it's actually looked at very positively. People who have worked in different roles and different industries before law, for example. But no, there's no being a final year student and being a recent graduate when you apply will have no impact on the application whatsoever.
Fantastic. And just sort of further on the application front, what do you think someone can do to really make their application sort of stand out from the crowd?
Stand out, I think. Okay, so this isn't necessary to stand out, but this is something that you have to make sure within all your applications. It's just that you've done your research and that you're actually talking about the firm that you're applying to, because we do get it quite a lot where we acknowledge that candidates are applying to multiple firms, and often more than 10 different firms, so they can get it a bit mixed up. But just make sure that will make your application stand out in a negative way if you're writing about a completely different firm. But in terms of making it stand out in a positive way, what we think is quite nice is to kind of have a sort of a dialogue that's kind of a little bit maybe like a story, something that can is maybe different to what other applicants will be saying. And it's fine if maybe your reason for wanting to go into law is that you really enjoyed studying it at university and you had some work experience and really enjoyed it. That's fine. But if you can maybe pick something out from that work experience that you really enjoyed doing and speak about that task specifically, or someone that you met in that work experience, just to add a little bit more to your application. But yeah, quite often when someone has a little bit of a story to tell, it can make the application stand out. Along with mentioning, if you've done any pro bono work, or any volunteering, or maybe even some work that you have done, a work experience that you did in a different industry that you didn't like, and that pointed you in the direction of actually I think I'm interested in law. They're all ways that you can stand out.
Excellent. And now, Oliver, there's probably some questions about PRISM, if that's all right. So you've already mentioned about, mentioning the LGBT network and LGBT work in your application and how that sort of positively benefited you. But to talk more about PRISM, I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of how you got it up and running, how staff at the firm can join, and some of the work you've done so far, if that's all right.
Of course, yes, happy to. PRISM officially stands for Pride, Respect, Support. PRISM simply matters. Sorry, and it basically was started by a partner a couple of years ago. He's left now. Just like any other committee, they had to look for funding in the firm. I mean, the great thing, the easy thing, I suppose, when Jess is the other co-chair, came into the picture, PRISM was already up and running. However, it had reached a slightly dead point by that point, because from what I understood was that people weren't necessarily coming to committee meetings. There wasn't too much happening. It was one of those official LGBT committees, but really when you looked at it in more depth, there wasn't much going on. So I was really passionate about getting it up and running and including as many people as possible. So the first thing that we did was actually recruit a committee. We already had the financial backing of the firm. That, however, required, repeated conversations with the finance partner of the firm that was administering our budget to make sure that we were given enough funding throughout the year. It's not always possible, of course, to know how much money you're going to need depending on how many events you'd like to throw and can fit into a year. Usually we had about one, so in terms of, obviously, engagement is key. So we had one internal social per quarter, so we had 4 of them per year. On top of that, we focused, as I mentioned earlier, on bi and trans inclusion. So we had a bi breakfast event together with the London Bisexuality Network, which was really important in order to attract a larger audience, because we wanted to get people from outside the firm as well. And that's actually something that was really beneficial for Reed Smith, because it sells the firm as an inclusive employer. So that's just a win-win situation again. So we had the backing from Reed Smith to throw larger events as well. We had a seminar provided by Global Butterflies. They are a company that tried to provide trans awareness amongst city employers. That was really well received. We had a full house, and even though that was just internal, that was a lunch event. It was the first time that we walked during Pride. That's something that I particularly wanted Reed Smith to participate in, because I felt like we were a bit late to the game, but never say never. And then we had an LGBT plus parenting event last December as well, focusing on the importance of and the possibilities of being an LGBT plus parent. So there've been, and then we had our first transitioning policy that we implemented across the firm. This was the first time that a Reed Smith office implemented that. So because we realized, if somebody wants to transition during their time, whether as a trainee or fee earner, non-fee earner, they have no guidance. And so we changed that, which is incredible. We made our handbooks gender neutral. So essentially what I'd like to say is we've done all these things because we've received so much support, whether that was monetary or empathetic support throughout our time as co-chairs. And our hands weren't tied at all. So it really depends on your own initiative, how much work you'd like to put in. I have to say, it's a lot of work. So we recruited a committee of 11 fee earners and non-fee earners, and they consisted of lots of trainees, but also secretaries and associates, senior associates, even a partner is involved. And we also included department leaders, and they would distribute our news to all the respective departments, because sometimes an email from somebody like ourselves, we're not known by every department in the firm, might just get lost. So we had our allies, and we do have senior allies as well, senior partners who support us. So yeah, just to sum up, there's a lot has happened over the last year, and it really just was a matter of getting involved. But there was nobody actually telling us what to do. There was nobody who said, this is what you should do. It was purely Jess and I sticking our heads together, then relaying it to the committee, and then together making it happen. And we're planning on continuing to do so.
Excellent. I'm just going to bring us around then to our final question. Probably a very quick one, but how do you feel the culture of the firm is affected by being an American firm based in London? If I have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a huge thought on that. And I think, luckily, I'm not sure I'm doing it a disservice here. So I don't know, there's nothing wrong with being American, but I'd like to think that lots of people are a bit scared. I was quite terrified of American law firms. I can be honest, and I can say I excluded all of the massive American law firms in my applications, purely because I was like, I know I won't fit into that kind of culture. Maybe that's not true for all of the departments, but at least with Reed Smith, that was the only exception where I was like, okay, I know they're based in Pittsburgh, but really they see themselves as a global international law firm. They have the largest office in London, and that really makes a huge impact. I think having a large office is one of the key criteria now for me, in terms of, if ever I wanted to look at another firm, because it makes it such a vibrant place, and it's really quite a lot of fun to work there. I know that sounds maybe a bit cheesy, and I wasn't paid to say this, but I really like the fact that you have so many departments. It creates a certain atmosphere. The fact that we've got an ethnic minorities network, a women's network, a mental health network. We've got all these sports networks. We've got, we throw parties, a summer party, a winter party. You couldn't really recreate that. And the reason I'm saying is because I spent 6 weeks at the Frankfurt office in Reed Smith, and it's tiny. It's like, I don't know, 40 people compared to 300. No, I think our London office is what, 700, including support staff
Mhm.
members. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's completely different. I mean, you can't replicate that, of course, because sometimes you just need that critical mass of people to attend events to give that kind of vibe. Yeah, and as Amber actually mentioned earlier, it's the culture that I would like to think sets it apart, because so far during all of my seats, I felt everybody was incredibly warm and incredibly approachable, and nobody had this kind of cutthroat approach. And in fact, during my LPC year, I remember we read a couple of horrifying stories from trainees at other Magic Circle law firms where they failed one of their modules, one of their very final LPC modules, and they were culled from the cohort and were literally told, sorry, you're not good enough then. And we panicked. And I remember I was the trainee committee rep at the time, and I spoke to our recruitment advisor, and she was like, no, we are not a firm like that. We wouldn't automatically kick you out. You know, we will always look at the bigger picture. And I think that really says it all. And I think, Amber, you can probably elaborate on that recruitment aspect or LPC aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But it really showed to me that they care about you as a person, and they don't see you as a commodity that's replaceable if you burn out. And so far, the last 2 years have exactly confirmed that image that I had before applying.
Yeah, I think like I would just echo all of that. And yeah, on the recruitment aspect, that's completely true. We have a policy where like resits are allowed with the LPC and the GDL, and we would take, it wouldn't just be a case of, you know, telling someone they're not coming, they can't do the training contract anymore. It would, there would be, you know, lots of people involved, and it would be a very kind of case by case basis, and we would do everything we can to keep that future trainee as a trainee. In terms of the culture compared to you know, traditional American firms, I think from what I've heard and from speaking to different members of the firm who have been there for a while, I think part of the kind of perception that we are maybe a more a friendlier American firm, we did merge with a British firm when we you know, started our office in London, which maybe helped with that perception. But I think another aspect of, you know, why there may be you know, why lots of people say that we are a friendlier American firm is due to there is an emphasis and lots of focus on making sure that all of our employees, whether that's fee earners or, you know, business services, you know, IT, that they all have a work-life balance. Obviously, if you're going into a legal career, you do know that working hours may be longer than a different career. But from what I've heard, obviously I haven't started my training contract yet, but from speaking to trainees, it's not that. So say if you are working long hours, it doesn't go unnoticed. You know, you're not just the only one in the office because you're a trainee and you have to stay late and do photocopying, for example. Like there will often be, you know, a partner there as well, because, you know, he's working on the case. So there'll be other people. It's not just left, you know, to you, which I think is quite, can often, from what I've heard, be the case in a lot of other firms, is that trainees, whilst it is a trainee's responsibility, you know, to maybe do the legwork, it's not, you know, everything's, all the kind of extra hours and everything aren't left, you know, to the trainee, and they do, you know, with all, like Oliver mentioned, all the kind of extracurricular things and networks and sports teams that we have all play a part in trying to create that, you know, effective work-life balance. But yeah, I do think I have spent time in a few different firms, and for me, culture was just really important. It was kind of top of the list, alongside, you know, the type of work that they do. But I do think you've got to think, if you're spending a lot of time somewhere, you want to enjoy where you're spending it and who you're spending it with, even if it's work. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, both of you. And I would like to offer a, you know, warm thank you to Oliver and Amber for coming to talk to us this afternoon. And thank, you know, to Reed Smith for being our inclusive employer this week. I do have a couple of details to bring up. So, Student Bites, we are back here again at 2 p.m. next Tuesday with Finance Specialist, the IG Group. However, we also have a special Student Bites tomorrow at 5 p.m. with Santander, where we're working with IE Out and Allies. All the details for this will be in the follow-up brief. Thursday, we have our coffee breaks. We're launching our new coffee breaks webinar where we'll be talking to the Clifford Chance LGBT Undergraduate of the Year with Tom Moran and discussing his experience with autism and LGBT inclusive sign language. So again, feel free to look over on My G Work, sign up for some of these webinars, make the most of your lockdown. And finally with that, we are also proud to announce that we are hosting the first Work Pride powered by Zoom on the 22nd of June. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can pre-register over on our website. Once again, though, thank you very much to Walla and Amber and Reed Smith and to all of you for attending. I've been George Wright, we've been My G Work, and this has been Student Bites. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoons. See you.